If you're just joining us, we're about to start our afternoon webinar with Ambassador Mulvaney, the Special Envoy for Northern Ireland from the United States. This is a Global Leadership Institute webinar here at Boston College on U.S. global leadership and Northern Ireland.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Good to see you too, so hope you're well.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Ambassador Mulvaney was recently appointed to the role of Special Envoy in March 2011. Prior to that, he had been the acting White House Chief of Staff and in the Director of the Office of Management Budget, and he was also a member of the House of Representatives. The ambassador is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill in law, and he also has a BS from Georgetown University, another Jesuit Catholic institution. Ambassador, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks very much. And I apologize for that little diversion. It may happen again. For better or for worse, I'm in a lobby of a hotel in Gastonia, North Carolina, doing this today in anticipation of the president's event here this afternoon. And a couple of folks have just walked through the lobby and said hello. So I apologize for that. But thank you for making this accommodation. Thank you for letting me do this out on the road and juggle 3 or 4 different jobs, because that's part of life these days. But I am looking forward to the chat, especially with Boston College. I will tell one interesting Jesuit story. I was in the very first time I walked into John Boehner's office, and I will tone this down from Boehner's ordinary language, because John and I both speak in a colorful manner, especially when the cameras are off. I'd never met him before, and I walked out of his office, and on the way out, he had his Xavier diploma on the wall, and I said, "Oh, it's always nice to see you guys who go to the second-tier Jesuit schools." And without missing a beat, he goes, "You Georgetown guys are all the same." So, and he did not know I went to Georgetown. So, but it is good to talk to you guys. It's nice to know that Catholic education continues in the Northeast someplace.
No, we're very, very honored to talk with you and to work with Georgetown as well on a regular basis. It's a great institution and have done remarkable work for the United States when it comes to foreign service. Ambassador, we don't have too much time today, so I'd like to jump right into it. You were recently appointed, as I said, in March 2011 to the role of Special Envoy. Previous Special Envoys have had certain visions and missions that they brought to it. Richard Haass came back to it recently with the multi-party talks, talking about the past and flags and the legacy of the troubles and parades. George Mitchell, Senator Mitchell, when he was there, obviously led the multi-party talks. Other special envoys worked on decommissioning or economic development. When you're new to the role, what's your vision and mission, for the Special Envoy's office now?
I think it's a really good question. It's sort of the type of questions I asked at the outset of it. I had a chance to talk to Richard Haass at some length. And Mitchell Reese and I have a lot of mutual friends. I don't know him personally, but I had a chance to chat with him, and I asked them the same question. And I think what I was able to derive from them was that it's sort of a situational approach, that there's typically something going on at the time that Richard was there or that Mitchell was there, that sort of helped define what their thesis was, what their sort of the general sense of things was. And as I've spent the last, 6 months doing this, most of it, unfortunately, remotely, which is much more difficult to do. I have had the one trip. We can talk about that in a second. I think that what the general theme is calm. With Brexit looming, with COVID ever present, I'm trying to encourage everybody to simply take a deep breath, step back, not overreact, and break these very, very difficult challenges into manageable pieces. Not to overreact, not to underreact, but to deal with these things in a reasonable and rational fashion. With the Northern Ireland Protocol, with the Internal Markets Bill, with the larger Brexit issue, is trying to just preach to everybody, okay, these could be difficult times, they could be challenging times, but let's not assume the worst. And let's try and break it down into pieces we can all handle and sort of take that, stand back, keep calm, and see if we can work the problem. And I think it's been fairly well received. I was, after my first trip, in one newspaper, I was accused of being a shill for Sinn Féin and the IRA, and the other I was accused of being a shill for Her Majesty's government. So I think I probably threaded it right down the middle, which is exactly what we've been shooting for.
Yeah, and you mentioned your recent trip. You visited Dublin, you were in Belfast, you were in London at the end of that trip. You met with both governments as well as the Northern Ireland executive. What were the things that you were talking about? What were the things that you heard from the parties on the ground in Northern Ireland as their main concern? And then what did you hear in Dublin and London? And maybe you could enlighten us on that.
Yeah, and I'll give a general answer. Maybe we can drill down a little bit because that's a broad-ranging answer to what we talked about on the trip. But obviously, it's impossible to go over now and not talk about the two big issues, which were COVID and Brexit, and the IMB being a subset of the Brexit topic. But starting with COVID, one of the things we've been pushing from the beginning is to be ready for economic development when we turn the corner on COVID. I think that everybody recognizes, or at least I hope everybody recognizes, that peace go hand in hand with prosperity in Northern Ireland, and the better off things are economically, the easier it's going to be to achieve working arrangements between all the various interests. So we've been pushing hard to try and at least make what initial introductions and connections we can between the business community in Northern Ireland and some of the specific business communities that I happen to know in the United States, and other folks that work for our government have cultivated. There's obviously an ongoing exchange of interest between the Northern Irish and the U.S. about investment in Northern Ireland, Belfast, Londonderry, Derry, the whole of Northern Ireland. But we've tried to cultivate that a little bit. I've got specific interests and connections to the financial technology sector, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and it just so happens there's the happy coincidence that is one of the areas that Northern Ireland is interested in cultivating. So I think that's been very, very well received. So we started with that, and that was not the pretense for the trip. I mean, I don't need a pretense to go. I don't think any of us do. But that was sort of the message, is that let's talk first about economic development, because we know that permeates so many other aspects of Northern Irish life and relationships. But clearly you couldn't stop there. We did talk a great deal about COVID, about that, how they've handled it, how we had talked about it. Believe it or not, when I was over in February, when I was still the chief of staff, and I sort of knew this transition was coming, I talked to the president. President and I are still on excellent terms. I'm going to see him, and I'm opening a campaign event for him today. I'm sorry, I completely lost my train of thought, which I do from time to time. It just starts to get old. It happens as you get old. But one of the things he and I talked about when we were over there, when I took the gig, was to try and talk about COVID as early as we possibly can. When I was there in February, everybody thought I was going over to talk about 5G, and I gave 2 or 3 sentences on 5G, and we talked about COVID. So they know over there in the devolved government, in the Republic, in London, that I've been involved with COVID from the very beginning, and we want to talk about how we got where we are and how we can get out from where we are. So we talked about that a lot. And obviously, Brexit was a big topic in all 3 cities that I was in. It wasn't focused in any particular city. It was the top of the list that those folks wanted to talk about as well. So we can, again, drill down on each of those if you see fit with the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot there for us to unpack. I will mention to the audience, we are taking questions. You can do that by the question and answer feature embedded in the webinar. Just write your questions, and I'll try to get them to the ambassador. Let's start with the economic and the business development. Obviously, there's been a concerted effort by both the Republic of Ireland, United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland separately as well, to engage in the United States in economic development. Enterprise Ireland, IDA, Northern Ireland Bureau, Invest Northern Ireland, all these agencies have been very active, very connected here in the Northeast, especially to what's happened in Dublin and Belfast in the tech sector. I mean, what are some of the differences that you heard between the 3 cities, or between the parties, in fact, about economic development and its impact? I mean, you know, when you were sitting down for meetings, you know, did Sinn Féin approach this topic in a way that was different from, say, the DUP or from, you know, the governing coalition in Dublin?
No, in fact, it was surprising, and in a positive sense, how much everybody was on the same page when it came to economic development. Even in the Republic, they talked about the importance of investment, U.S. investment in Northern Ireland, which I was impressed by. But there was no space between DUP and Sinn Féin and the devolved government when it came to the importance of economic development, the types that they wanted. They raised an issue I had not raised, that had not been raised before with me. Arlene had mentioned natural gas transportation as something they wanted to focus on. That was the one new thing I heard that I've not heard before, because so much of it is focused on financial technology. We did talk about some of the things that the Northern Ireland has learned about itself during COVID, and the last 2 or 3 weeks notwithstanding, which we've seen things take a turn for the worse. The first couple months of their experience with COVID was really good. Really good, not really good. I mean, the way they handled it was really good, and it actually brought, I think, a lot of the members of the various parties from the devolved government together and sort of combat with a common enemy. And I think one of the things they learned is that there are some advantages. There's some economic advantages to being a fairly small country. That when you have it's an extended community, you have the ability to control a pandemic in the way that, say, India or China does not. And they expressed to me the belief, and I tend to agree with them, that that's a competitive advantage for them going forward. That I think that they are right when they contend that when nations all over the world start competing for new direct foreign investment as we come out of COVID, in fact, it's going on right now, that competition, that how you handle COVID will now be on that sort of the checklist of topics that companies want to talk about when they make a decision on investment. And I think what Northern Ireland has proved is that they can handle it better than China. They can handle it better than Brazil. They can handle it better than India. And for that reason, it should move them up on the list of places that folks are interested in investing. I heard that from all the parties. And I think it's right and encouraging that everybody seems to be on the same page for messaging. So, look, COVID presents all sorts of challenges. We all know that it does. It presents challenges in our lives. That's why we're doing this virtually instead of doing it in person. But it also creates opportunities. And I think that one of the things I take away from the trip is that the devolved government, the joint executive, really does see this as a way to position themselves for success as we come out of it.
That's great. Of course, all these three issues are really tightly intertwined. And so, when you were talking about the economic opportunities for Northern Ireland, to what extent and there was a question that's come in from the audience here on this, to what extent did the Brexit negotiations and the all-island economy, come up? For example, has there been consideration, or what are the current talks on Brexit and its impact on, say, agriculture or on logistics and transport?
Yeah, you couldn't have the conversation without talking about Brexit and the internal markets bill and all that. I mean, it was all rolled into one, right? Because so many things. COVID affects economic development. Brexit affects economic development. So you're absolutely right. It was in the next breath. You'd finish this conversation about COVID and they go, and now let's talk about Brexit. So what did we hear? We heard concern in the Republic about the internal markets bill. My friend Richie Neal had just sent a letter about a week before I went over. I've talked to Richie in his office regularly. I had no difficulty with the letter. I've talked with Richie about that. I thought that it was well stated. By the way, I keep about a handful of members briefed at all times. It's Richie Neal and Pete King, Brendan Boyle, David Joyce, small other folks who I talked to before and after the trip. But Brexit was clearly on their mind as to how is it going to play out. They knew that if it goes well, there's tremendous opportunities. Because if it goes well, Northern Ireland is going to be able to say something and sell something that no one else, no other area, no other country, no other region in the whole world is going to be able to sell, which is that if you set up shop in Northern Ireland, you will have unfettered access to the UK market and unfettered access to the EU market. Now, there's things that have to happen in order for them to be able to say that, but the plan is for them to be able to say that. And everybody, London, Belfast, Dublin, was committed to that. I'm having dinner, my goodness gracious, I think it's tomorrow night with the EU ambassador to the United States, Stavros Lambrinidis. He and I are friends, and that's been his attitude from the very beginning as well, is that he sees the importance of treating Northern Ireland specially. So that was clearly the optimistic side of the discussions. But there's a long way to go from where we are now to getting to that point. And the flow of goods is going to be an issue, the flow of services. probably an issue as well. I think goods probably take a bigger role immediately. But when you talk about services, for example, that's where your all island discussion comes in. How do you deal with tourism? How do you deal with communities that are located near the border where pubs and restaurants in Northern Ireland are being treated differently than pubs and restaurants just across the border? And I think there you have started to see some really good discussions about harmonizing the policies. I think that Simon Coveney either was up in Belfast or Arlene and Michelle came down to see him. I lose track of where everybody's meeting, but those discussions are ongoing. And I think folks recognize the importance of harmonizing those things in the name of economic development, in the name of economic harmony. So that clearly came up as a conversation. But it's not, listen, let's not be Pollyannish. We're not there yet. We follow the developments on a daily basis. I get 5 or 6 emails a day from our team. And by the way, our team in Belfast is fantastic, as is the team in Washington, D.C. But I get as much information as I can possibly digest. We followed as closely as everybody on this conference call. And we're again, concerned. We're watching it with interest. We're not panicking by any stretch of the imagination that, let's calm down and see if we can work through this attitude. I still think is right. But we have a long way to go before we have that goal of having that Northern Ireland that is specially positioned from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, Ambassador, you've been stressing calm and patience throughout your trip. On a couple of instances, in one in particular, you gave a talk at Policy Exchange where you talked about the importance not to jump to conclusions, that the United States will look at this rationally, calmly, and coolly. And then you went on to say that maybe under certain circumstances, and you were talking about the internal market bill, that maybe under certain circumstances, there may be a challenge created to the Good Friday Agreement. So, intimately connected with Brexit and the economy is Brexit and the political situation in Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement. And you were very clear on your trip that the Good Friday Agreement, protecting it is in the interest of the United States. Brexit, the Irish Protocol, the withdrawal agreement, the internal markets bill is not. At what point, do you have a mechanism to tell at what point, those issues, the internal market bill and Brexit, become a matter for the Good Friday Agreement?
When does it cross over? That's a really good question. And that was central to all of my discussions. One of the questions I wanted to answer when I went over, as I said, look, the EU-UK trade agreement, really none of our business. The internal market bill, really probably none of our business. These are domestic matters and international matters with other countries. But as soon as it starts to touch on the Good Friday Agreement, it is in our interest to follow what's happening. Keep in mind, and I'm not a big fan of hyperbole. And listen, Brendan Boyle's a good friend of mine. I mean, we formed the Irish Centenary Caucus together. I talk to Brendan on a regular basis. But to say that we are a signatory to the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, it's not. That's the type of hyperbole that doesn't help. We're not a guarantor of the agreement. We're not a signatory of the agreement, but we are very interested and invested in seeing it succeed, as are so many other different groups. So what I try to simply convey is, okay, let's look at this IMB and see what might happen that could trigger that point where it becomes no longer a domestic issue and becomes an issue that also touches on the United States. And what I wanted to answer when I went over is everyone aware of the risks of an accidental border? I remember asking everybody about the same question, but I asked Simon Coveney as directly as I did anybody else. I said, Simon, here's my concern. No one wants a border. I get that. Yay. I think everybody understands that. But let's say the UK leaves with no deal. Okay. And so right now there's really no understanding about what happens on goods moving from Belfast to Dublin. But the Brits are not going to put up a hard border. They know the ramifications of that. So they don't do it. The Irish then are looking at that and saying, well, under different circumstances, we might want a border up there, but we also recognize the significance of that, and we're not going to put it up. What if the Europeans then come up and say, well, now we have a problem. Now we have the chance of goods going from the UK into the Republic and thus into mainland Europe without the sort of protections that are afforded by an agreement. We can't allow that. So Ireland, we are going to ring the entire island of Ireland and use that to try and put pressure on the Irish or the British to put up a border in order to solve this problem. I was concerned, that's what I call the border by accident, that no one really wants a border, but you end up with one inadvertently at the end of the process. And to a group, to a man and woman, I think everybody said, and I believe them, that they were aware of these risks. They were aware of the downside risks of doing this. and that it would never come to them. And the specific answer that Simon Coveney gave me that I thought rang the most true out of all the true answers I got, there are no false answers, but the one that really struck home for me is there's a lot more places that the Europeans can pick for leverage on the British in the event of a fallout, a no-deal Brexit, other than the border of Northern Ireland. They could deal with things like the land bridge into Europe. They could deal with commercial aviation. There's all sorts of levers the Europeans can pull in a negotiating discussions with the UK that do not lead to a border on the island of Ireland. I heard that again and again and again from all parties. I've heard it from Stavros as well in Washington, D.C. I think the Europeans understand the importance of not having that hard border. In fact, one of them told a story about how the Portuguese even took the position at a local conference that the price of fish in Portugal was not as important as peace on the island. I heard somebody question the history of that, but that was the story Simon told me, and I believe that to be true. I also asked, I said, look, it's been 20 years now since the Good Friday Agreement. You have an entire new generation of leadership in all of the countries. I'm fairly well satisfied, just from a historical standpoint, that politicians in the UK understand the tenuous nature of stability in Northern Ireland. I think they understand the same thing in the Republic, but I was concerned as to whether or not that historical perspective was carried through to leaders in the European Union on the mainland. And everybody, to a man, woman, and child, told me that they believe that to be the case, so that Europeans understand the importance and the risks associated with a border on the island of Ireland. So that was sort of one of my takeaways, was that no one wants it, and that just as importantly, everyone was attuned to the possibility of an accidental border, and that they were going to work hard not to make it happen. That was the top line takeaway for me from the trip.
Just kind of one further question on that. I mean, to what, you spoke to all the leaders there. It seems like everyone is attuned to that problem that you highlighted. I mean, will a hard border be avoided? Or is there a scenario where, because of the Brexit complications, that could happen regardless of the challenges?
Yeah, and that's what I think. I don't think so. I really don't think so. That was my takeaway from the trip, is that everybody is so attuned to the risks that they don't want it. And by the way, why is that? What stood out in my mind is talking to all of these folks about it. And I can't remember who it was who expressed this to me. So I won't attribute it at risk of screwing this up. But one of the folks in the Republic mentioned to me that the Europeans, especially, look at the Good Friday Belfast agreements as a success story. One of the rare success stories in Europe where they've been able to work out their problems in a semi-permanent sort of manner. There is stability there now. They're not worried about Northern Ireland. Certainly you worry about economic development and all that, but it's not the same as the issues they're dealing with in the Balkans, for example. So it's an example to the Europeans out of their own mouths of something that has worked, and they will work hard not to undermine that. So while technically the answer to your question is yes, there's always a risk that something unforeseen happens that raises the possibility of a hard border on the island. But I do believe that everybody, the United States included, is working hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And with everybody on the same page, I do not think it is nearly as much of a risk as I thought it was when I left on the trip.
Okay, well, we'll have to continue to watch that space. I did want to return to the third issue you raised in terms of the economic issues, and that was COVID. Back in July, and you've already highlighted this, you pointed out that the executive had done a good job in coming together as a group to combat COVID as well as any other government possibly could have. Obviously now there's a lockdown in Northern Ireland as well as one in the Republic. One interesting thing to me about diplomacy is that it works two ways, right? So you're the special envoy to Northern Ireland, but you bring things back as well. I mean, what did you see in Northern Ireland that the U.S. can learn on some of these issues around COVID?
Oh, it's a really good question. I haven't thought about that, so I'll think off the top of my head. I thought at first, that the Northern Irish, especially, but Europeans generally, had overreacted. When I was looking at their infection rates per 100,000, they were raising all sorts of red flags when their infection rates were lower, for example, than they were in this country, dramatically lower in some circumstances. And I wondered if they hadn't talked themselves into being overly afraid of the virus. At the same time, in the course of the last couple of weeks, when we've seen these fairly dramatic changes of policies, I think the Republic today announced, or yesterday, that they're going to stage 5 for the next 6 weeks, or at least that happened this week sometime. Sometimes I lose track of what day it is. I called over to our offices over there and said, what do you think triggered this? And what triggered this was the exact right thing to trigger this, which is they're running out of intensive care unit beds. I have maintained from the very beginning and sent the message when I was on the trip that the number of cases is really not the determinant factor in how you respond. I used an anecdote, by the way, from my home state of South Carolina. We had 1,700 students infected in the first 3 or 4 weeks of school when the University of South Carolina opened up in September. But none of those children were admitted to the hospital, okay? So if you look at the number of cases, that doesn't give you the whole pictures. Sometimes the issues become who needs medical care, who needs intensive medical care, what is the circumstance surrounding children, younger people, I shouldn't say children, I apologize for that, younger people going back into their communities on vacation and to being with their older relatives who might be at higher risk. So those were the types of things that we discussed. And I thought that, for example, Michal Martin, I think a week or 10 days ago, did not go to stage 5, despite the fact that his health minister suggested it, because he was doing the proper balancing between the health needs and the economic needs of the Republic. And then makes the change here in the last 72 hours or so, because the circumstance had changed regarding the number of hospitalizations and the number of the capacity of the healthcare system. Again, number of cases, not the sole factor. I don't even think it's the determining factor. I think what you're looking at is whether or not your healthcare system can bear the weight of the challenge, can bear the weight of the disease. Because if you can get relatively good healthcare, and they have that certainly in both the Republic and in Northern Ireland, that the fatality rate of the disease goes down dramatically. That really, when you see that spike, is when it goes to the truly at-risk populations, such as the elderly or the ones with what we call comorbidity, or when they start to outstrip the capacity of the healthcare system. Those are the conversations we had. I shared some of our experiences over here, some things I think we did right, some things I think we did wrong, some of the reasons I think we did what we did. It was not lost on any of them that I was there in February when I was still the chief of staff. And again, knowing I was going to transition to this job shortly thereafter. And the message then was, please be careful of COVID. In fact, specifically, please help us with Italy, which at the time was the last major European nation to still have unrestricted flights from China. So I was over there February 20th. Trying to deliver that message. And they know that we built a little bit of credibility, I think, with them because of that. I had dinner in London with Sir Edward Lister, who I had that very, very frank conversation with in February. He's the Boris Johnson's chief of staff. He was my counterpart at the time. So yes, we had some very detailed discussions about what they've done, why they've done what they've done, what we've done and why. And I think the flow of information helped in both directions.
Great. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to try to push some of the questions that have come into us from the audience together.
And I'll try and do better about shorter answers. I apologize.
No, you're fine. You're great. No, it's fulsome answers are wonderful. Ambassador, you've been really open about your affinity for Ireland. Obviously, you can trace some of your lineage back to Mayo, although I think you let slip in policy exchange that you also have a Polish background. That's fine. I have an Italian background. It's not a prerequisite. Combined with that, and the Trump administration's position or President Trump's position on Brexit, and then now I haven't unfortunately been able to travel to Belfast or Northern Ireland in a while, but I have seen banners from some in the unionist community who support President Trump, and they point out his support of Brexit and their interest of their community. Now, how have you found your personal heritage and your professional political one? How does that play for you in these discussions? Has it helped or hindered you in any certain circumstances?
I'll deal with the political first and then deal with the personal after that. The political stuff has been great. I mean, listen, George Mitchell is he's an icon, right? He's a giant in this realm. Richard Haas continues to participate in this and is a widely respected sort of personality. Mitchell is the same, along with many of the other folks who have served in this office. But I think both the Irish, the Northern Irish, the folks in Great Britain, both were pleasantly surprised when Donald Trump put his former chief of staff in this position, someone who can still call the president. And again, going to see the president today. I'm not sure. Like I know George Mitchell could do that at need be, but that's not an everyday occurrence in this particular position. To have a Northern Irish special envoy with essentially a hotline into the Oval Office if need be. Haven't needed it. Have talked to the president briefly on some things, but for the most part have not needed it. But I think they understand that appointment comes with a certain understanding of the import of the position and of the issues. Personally, I was always concerned, and one of the questions I asked Richard, I won't betray many confidences here, but I asked him, look, Richard, I'm Irish Catholic. Do you think that's going to be a drawback? He said, yeah, it probably would make some people, think twice about you. But it's not something that isn't overcomable. And I found that to be exactly the case. One of my favorite, and one of the reasons, I'm so desperate to do more things face to face is that there's an element to human interaction that you get lost when you do this. And I was walking through downtown Belfast with one of the heads of the Chamber of Commerce, who was a Protestant from the Shankill, very flamboyant, colorful individual, and someone who I immediately knew that I liked. And because of the connection that we made, we were able to have very frank conversations about the Protestant communities and the Catholic communities. And we had an immediate respect for each other. So that I don't think it's insurmountable. In fact, I know that it's not. And I've been very well received by all the groups. In fact, it was stunning. I think one of the groups that sort of beat on me the most when I was there was Sinn Féin, because I don't have relationships with Mary Lou, for example, like I do with Micheál or with Leo, just because they've been in government for a while now, and I came to know them through my work in Congress, especially my work on the E3 visas, which we might get a chance to talk about here today very briefly. But the relationships were good across the board. I never felt any chilling effect on anyone's willingness to sit down and talk to me at all. Do I think at the back of their minds they're still wondering if I have allegiances one way or the other? Sure, but that's the nature of the place that they live. It's part of the self-identification. So I have no difficulty with it. Never, I'm not ashamed of my Irish heritage. Certainly not ashamed of my Catholic faith. And I think folks respect that. So no, I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive. And it's certainly not been a hindrance at all to my work.
Great. There are a lot of questions that have come in, but you did hit on a very important issue there, the E3 visa. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your conversations around that and what the status is and how you see that developing in the near term.
Yeah, real short answer. Call Tom Cotton and tell him to stop objecting to the bill. I've worked on this now for almost 10 years. We have an agreement, a bill that is passed unanimously, or at least it passed on suspension in the House. It is ready to be hotlined in the Senate, and Senator Cotton is holding it up. He's not even holding it up because of his objections to this bill. He's interested in another immigration matter called the Country Caps Bill, and he's using this as leverage. And I like Tom. Tom and I were in Congress together. I have a great deal of respect for him. But this is a good bill. This is the one, by the way, it's the short version of this, folks, is that the Australians are afforded a certain number of visas every single year for a variety of really good reasons. But for another variety of other good reasons, they don't use all of them. And the proposal is that if there's any visas that the Australians do not use in a particular year, that same number of visas that are unused would be made available to the Irish the next year, so that the net increase would be zero. The Australians could take 10,000 every single year if they want to, but they don't. So the surplus would go over to the Irish. I thought it was a really good proposal. Even more importantly, the reason it found such favor in the Trump administration, and I saw President Trump commit to this bill with Leo Varadkar when he was still, Varadkar, sorry, I keep mispronouncing that, when he was in the Oval Office two St. Patrick's Days ago, is that the Irish offered something in exchange. This often doesn't get a lot of attention, which is they offered certain accommodations to American citizens who have retired or have set up residency in Ireland, to lower the amount of money they have to invest, to lower what they have to pay for healthcare. It was a give and a take, which appealed to this president because that was a deal. It was not just somebody asking for something from the United States. It was a proposal. It was a give and a take. It was a negotiation, and I thought it was a really, really good one. So the Irish are still willing to live up to their end of the deal in order to get these additional visas. This administration stands ready to stand by our commitments as well, but we need that legislation. It could happen tomorrow if Senator Cotton would remove his objections to the bill. So there's my short pitch for the Trump administration's policy on Irish immigration.
Is that the key, in your estimation, to immigration reform more generally? Is a deal, some kind of a give and a take on both sides?
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, I thought it was brilliant. It was actually it was a senior advisor to Leo, John Deasy, who came up with it. Who said, "Look, I've known the president. I've studied the president for years. The president's not interested in handouts. He wants to negotiate this, and he was the one who came up with that proposal. And I thought it was brilliantly considered. And if it works, I think since a really good example to other countries, which is, look, we have American citizens living in countries all over the world. They come under all sorts of scrutiny and all sorts of requirements that could be loosened, that could be liberalized. And maybe this makes a basis for conversations going forward on a bilateral basis with other countries on okay, if we're going to do something for your citizens coming here, what are you doing for our citizens going there? I think that's one of those things that to use an overused expression could be a win-win situation. So I was very impressed and excited when the proposal was presented to the president in the Oval Office. Very excited to see the president's eager acceptance of the deal and a commitment to get it done. We just haven't been able to get Senator Cotton to remove his objections.
Okay, well, there's a couple of questions that have come in that are if you have a few more minutes, that are connected here in theme. There's a question here about maybe what surprised you on your recent trip. And I'm going to push two questions together. One is about, one attendee asks about, have you seen any interest moving towards a unified Ireland or not in your conversations? And the other, which may be related to this or not, but I think surprises a lot of visitors to Ireland, is about the progressive nature of Irish society. I mean, were you surprised, by changes in Ireland? I mean, since you're a regular visitor, perhaps not. But I mean, what are your thoughts on the progressive nature of Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Yeah. My daughter was at Trinity for a while. She was there for 18 months or so. She transferred to Georgetown this year, but she also went to high school there. She went to Alexander College in Dublin, and so I've been over a couple of times and was over during the recent referendum on gay marriage, and was quite honestly surprised to see that both of the major parties, Fine Gael and Fine Gael, were in support of that. That told me that Ireland had changed a lot. Culturally in the last generation. By the way, it's also not lost on me that the Holy Father came out today, the Pope came out today with perhaps moderating the church's position on gay marriage. So maybe that's the way things are going, but I was surprised to see that at the time. I think it will be an issue when they start talking about, as they review issues towards a united Ireland, because the Northern Ireland still remains, from what I can see at least, pro-life. One of the things that I was dealing with before I was the special envoy, just through my private work with a group called the International Catholic Legislators Network, was the new abortion rules in Northern Ireland that were being mandated by Westminster, that a lot of folks in Northern Ireland, a lot of political leaders were pushing back on, but they didn't have the ability to do it because at the time Stormont was not stood up. But again, these are very complicated issues. They are domestic issues, so I am not interested in weighing into how Ireland, the Republic, or Northern Ireland deals with abortion or gay marriage. That is their business. It certainly does not touch on the American interests in the region. But a unified island certainly probably would touch on our interests, and so it's something I follow just as closely as everybody else. I will tell you the same thing I have told everybody on every side over there. Mark Daly is a good friend of mine. You know how much Mark time he spent on a potential unified Ireland, and this is the only advice I have been able to give them, which is just because you win a border poll doesn't mean it's the time to do the border poll. Sometimes the worst possible outcome is a 51-49 vote on a referendum. I think they're seeing that a little bit now with Brexit. If you're going to make big decisions like that as a nation, or big decisions like that as many nations, you'd like it to be 65-35 or 70-30. I think that that it's when and if it happens, it needs to be the type of thing that everybody looks at and says, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So I've encouraged caution. And again, going back to that, keep calm, look at things rationally and reasonably, not engage in hyperbole. The same would apply on my perspective on a border poll. There are some folks who think it could be won today. There's other folks who think it would be lost today. My point is that sometimes a narrow decision is just as good as no decision, or worse, and you're better to work one way or the other towards an overwhelming decision for or against.
Okay, great. Well, I have one really final question. It's a really political sciencey questions about security. You mentioned this when you started, that when you went over originally, you had planned to speak a little bit about 5G, and then you hadn't spoken so much about 5G. Obviously, it was a major decision was taken in the UK about this. I mean, in your role as special envoy, what can you do to help ensure that, as we move through Brexit and into, a true post-Brexit period, that the UK, Ireland, Northern Ireland, the United States are able to collaborate and communicate effectively? I mean, one thing that I've definitely seen firsthand is that people work together better when they're able to easily connect and share information with one another. I mean, what role are you able to kind of play in ensuring that information sharing doesn't break down?
Again, it's another source of information. It's another source of communication. It's, I'm not heavily involved in 5G, was not heavily involved in 5G on my first trip. The only reason I even mentioned it when I met with Leo and I met with Sir Edward was that because the press had opined that I was coming over to talk about 5G. Mulvaney comes to berate the UK on 5G decisions and so forth. Nothing could have been further from the truth. There again, the press was wrong, as they often are. The truth of the matter is that it was actually a Secretary of Commerce, a Department of Commerce trip about a week or two before mine that raised 5G. It was not on my agenda. So I sort of said, look, the press said that I'm here about 5G. We don't want you to buy Chinese stuff. That's the end of the 5G conversation. Now let's talk about why I'm really here, which is COVID. But we now have relationships that didn't exist 6 months ago. Simon Coveney can pick up and call me on the cell phone, and has. Sir Edward Lister and I have maintained a good relationship since we met 2 years ago. So there's more channels of communication there. But to the larger issue of security, I think that, again, I'll call this a silver lining, and it's hard to look at that. So that's not the right language, but I'm struggling for the right term. Of the COVID situation is that I think more countries now have sort of had the veil removed about where the Chinese are in their development as a first tier nation. I won't say first world nation, I don't like that term, but a first tier nation. And how they've handled COVID from the very outset, I think has sent a message to a lot of other countries that they cannot be trusted the same as they would be the United States or Australia or Germany or Ireland or the UK or Italy even, that there's something different about the Chinese structure. There's something different about the way they run their government and the way they interact with other countries that should raise yellow, if not red flags, about putting very sensitive technology owned by Chinese companies and possibly having access to giving access to the Chinese government into your most sensitive technological infrastructure. I think that is a conversation that we tried to force and were forcing before COVID. We were pushing against a much looser door on having those conversations since the COVID outbreak.
Okay, well, thank you, Ambassador. I have kind of one final question, and it is about transitions. If the president is returned, perhaps you'll remain in the office, but as we all know, ambassadors serve at the pleasure of the president. Right. What are you preparing to do as you look to the future here, whether you're in the role or not? How do you help the next special envoy lead?
Yeah. And I've already started thinking about that, and I have no idea who it might be under a Biden administration. And I'll do everything I can. Listen, this is a nonpartisan position. It really is. It's a political appointment, yes. But I did not have, Richard Haas did not talk to me about the president when I talked to him. Mitchell did not talk to me when I talked. We don't care about domestic U.S. politics. We care about what our policies are and what the policies are of any particular given administration. But I cannot imagine that a Biden administration would be any different on its position towards Northern Ireland than the Trump administration is. Everybody's on the same page. Richie Neal and I are on the same page. Brennan Boyle and I are on the same page. Peter King and David Joyce the same. We are interested in seeing a peaceful and prosperous Northern Ireland, and we stand ready to help make that happen. We see our role as Americans, not as guarantors or signatories to the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, but as a trusted friend and as needed interlocutor between various parties and interests in that region, so that if they find a need for a third party to step in, to deliver messages, to receive messages, to help move discussions, even to possibly mediate or arbitrate minor disputes, we stand ready to do that. It's my job to build the type of credibility to where, well, look, I think it was it Richard who was, after he served as special, no, it was, well, yeah, I think Richard, after he served as special envoy, was invited to come back to work on the disarmament matter. And Mitchell, after he served as special envoy, was invited to come back to work on the IRC studies on paramilitarism. That's evidence of them doing the exact right and correct job on building credibility as a not as a disinterested third party, but as an interested but trustworthy third party. That's my goal in the job. It should be the goal of anybody who serves this job. And to the extent whether Donald Trump wins or Joe Biden wins, I'm not doing this job the rest of my life. And I'll do everything I can to make sure that the next person in line sort of builds on what those folks build on, what I've been able to do in my short time in the office. So no, I'm not too concerned about the political outcome. I think that the policies of this country towards that part of the world are correct. And I think they're being properly pursued, and they will be either way, regardless of the outcome of the election.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. I want to thank you for taking the time today. It was a pleasure to hear from you and to get an insight on your recent trip and some of the policies and practices you hope to bring to Northern Ireland. And it's good to see a U.S. leadership at the highest level in Northern Ireland. Obviously, there was a period there where there was no special envoy and the executive was not sitting. So from that perspective, and as someone who's very concerned about the health and safety in Northern Ireland, it's good to see the executive up and running and a special envoy back in that role. So thank you for doing that, and I wish you the best of luck as you continue to do this work. And I doubly do that as a employee of a Jesuit Catholic institution to a graduate of a Jesuit Catholic institution.
Bob, thanks very much for having me. I very much appreciate it. Thanks for your work, and let's keep in touch. I hope to be over again as soon as travel. I could go today, but no one can meet with me. So let's hope that changes soon, because diplomacy face to face is much better than Zoom webinars.
I do hope you get back pretty soon. I hope I get back soon. I've canceled several trips at this point, and I keep waiting for that vaccine to come out. But as soon as it does, we'll be on the next Aer Lingus flight over. Well, thank you very much. And yes, I would love to hear from you again as you make progress in your role.
Thanks, Bob. Have a good day. See you guys.